Welcome to the Shared Power Podcast, a series for organizations and leaders committed to collectively advancing justice and equity. I'm your host, Mia Henry. I'm the CEO of Freedom Lifted, and I'm the daughter of activists, educators, entrepreneurs, and survivors. I've had the honor of teaching, facilitating, and co-leading in schools and nonprofits for over 2 decades. I've learned a lot, but it hasn't always been easy. There are conversations that I had, or I wish I had, that I believe create the conditions for more effective collective leadership. In season 1 of this podcast, we're going to dive deep into these conversations. These topics will help us explore how we can build trust, navigate conflict, and lead in partnership with one another. If you believe that relationship building is the foundation for justice work, you are in the right place. Join me as we explore the ingredients for leading with shared power. Our first conversation of the series will feature one of the producers of the show, Alysia Tate. Alysia is a justice and equity advocate and a Montessori preschool teacher. With years of experience in nonprofit leadership, public policy, and informed investigative journalism, she now works to support her students in growing an awareness around justice, equity, inclusion, and of course, shared power. In this episode, Alysia and I will talk about the intention behind this whole series. We'll discuss how we chose the episode topics, our guests, and why justice and equity work matters in every area of life, no matter what career you choose.
Well, hey, Mia.
Hey, Alysia.
It's so great to be with you and be doing this project together, this amazing, amazing project of Shared Power Podcast. I love it. I wanted to kick off this first episode, with you asking you a few questions about how we got here. I just think this is such an amazing moment we're in history, because it's a time when the whole idea of power is being so manipulated and so misunderstood. And there are just these like giant global issues, global and local issues, that we need totally new solutions for. And it can leave a lot of people, sometimes me included, feeling really powerless and in knowing how to make change. And I love that you took this on, this idea of breaking down the idea of sharing power into really understandable chunks. Like it's very user friendly for someone like me who feels like I don't have all the decades of experience that you and your guests do. Um, and really a lot of nuts and bolts solutions and strategies, not just for sharing it, but also building it and really like living it out in our organizations and our lives. So that's kind of the big picture of how I've been thinking about why this is such an important series of conversations to be having now. But let's talk a little more specifically. So why did you feel like now was the right time to have these conversations about shared power, Mia?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree that it's such an interesting time in our history, and I don't know if there's ever an uninteresting time in our history if we're paying attention,
True,
but
true.
certainly yeah, but certainly the idea of power, I think, is not only being misunderstood and used, right? I mean, this is the misuse of power is like the tragedy of any moment, right? But it's
Mm,
also being um, understood and claimed and seen as a corrective power in a lot of ways as well. Or power is seen as corrective in a lot of ways. So we understand how people are rising up collectively, right, across the globe to fight fascism as fascism becomes stronger, right? Or fascist ways become
right.
stronger in different places. We see people using media or developing media and using media in ways never before seen, right? So it's really democratizing voice and access and visibility. So I think that people are are touching power and holding power and seeing it and feeling it in ways just kind of never before seen, you know?
But why 8? Why did you wanna have 8 conversations about power?
Right. So the eight conversations really came from, in all honesty, this book by John and Julie Gottman. So it's a relationship book, right? I saw my relationship with my partner really deepen after going through those eight conversations.
Mm,
Um, and even though we had known each other for years before we read that book together, there were stories and insights that I had never heard before, and I don't think I would have had we not had intentional um, time together, and really took the prompts seriously. And so to recreate that, I think for people building organizations together, I thought would be a great gift. And I
yep.
think what the eight dates have done is give me the opportunity to create a framework that allows people and invites people in to pay as much attention to that internal work as they do to the campaigns and the movements that they're building.
I mean, this is such an example of the brilliance of Mia Henry's mind, right? Like, I love how you think, how your mind travels through something. Because I don't think I fully put all those pieces together when we first started talking about this, but it's so perfect that this came out of a book about dates, a book about dates with
Yeah.
your life partner, because every conversation you have is it comes down to relationships, and all the people in these conversations are people you have very meaningful relationships with, from a variety of different, projects or organizations or whatever. So, I would love to share how I've been reflecting on this because I have a very different life day to day from yours. But first, before
Yes.
I
Yeah.
get to do that, I want you to say a little bit about like how you chose these 8 people. Just give us some
Mm.
examples. What I mean, it doesn't because we could have an entire conversation about each of these 8 people because they're such amazing, interesting. It's such an interesting mix of folks. But just talk a little bit about how you chose some of these people for some of these
Mm.
topics.
Yeah. So, I'm so excited about this podcast, and I want to just take a second before I forget to thank you, Alicia, because it was because of your encouragement that this project even is happening and the
Aw.
podcast is happening. Because I, just would never do it without without trust people I trust believing in the power of the work. So once I gave myself, permission to host the podcast. On one hand, it was easy to choose who I wanted to bring on, and another hand, it was like I've been so blessed with incredible relationships with amazing people
Yeah,
and I've gotten a
yeah,
chance to do real work with them,
yeah.
that
Mhm.
it was hard for me to limit the list, and that is why, I'm like, okay, can we do another season? There's so many other people,
Yeah.
but there were people that kind of, yeah. Well, first, I haven't talked about, what the eight dates are, or what the eight conversations that I came up with are. But we talked about a few of the conversations in the Gottman's book for co-directors or anyone trying to share power. So it's not just for co-directors, but it could be for people who are co-leading a project, or
Mm.
even collaboratives, people, three,
Mhm.
4, 5 people who are trying to collectives, people who are trying to lead together. What are the conversations? So I wanted to first start with this idea of telling our origin stories, how we come to the work, right?
Mhm.
So much in the Gottman's book was about looking back on how we were raised, and that can be really painful for some of us,
Yeah. Yeah.
or it could be beautiful, or it could, for many of us, most of us, a mix of both. Yeah. So, but I thought it was really important because there's a story as to how I came to do the work I'm doing as well. And it often does
Of
start with
course.
how we were raised, you know?
Hmm.
um, but sometimes it's just even talking about what job or work we were doing right before this one, and if how how we felt coming out of that work, because a lot of people that I was working with in organizations had not healed from trauma and broken trust, from ideas being stolen from them. They had not maybe even addressed those things, much less entered a space of healing from
Hmm.
what happened in their previous job or their previous work. And they were bringing that, usually unconsciously bringing that into the work they were doing now, you know? So it's
Mm-hmm.
not just about like a romanticized, talk about our origin stories and, how our mama inspired us and everything.
Right.
And I say that
Right.
because that's part of mine. But it's also like, and I've been underestimated in previous jobs. I've
Yep.
been ignored. I've been overworked. I've been underpaid. All these things have happened in previous work. So it doesn't matter that I'm in a new job that, maybe trying to do everything right. I haven't necessarily healed from the things that happened to me just even in the previous job. So
Hmm.
telling our origin stories was a really important conversation, I think, to start with for people,
Hmm.
because it was giving people permission to talk about the past and
Hmm.
how the past was impacting how they were showing up in the present.
Yep.
And then the other conversations, defining leadership, connecting identity and power. As you know, my training work that we do now always starts with that, connecting all our different identities, right? Racial, disability, or say race, disability, gender, sexual orientation, so many different ways that we identify. How does that impact how we understand power and how powerful we feel?
Hmm.
Um, our communication style, talking through communication styles, was a conversation. That's one that we have at our team at Freedom Lifted quite often, using both like assessments and like formally with assessments like Clifton Strengths and that kind of thing, but also informally, um, making how we make decisions, how we navigate conflict, how we spend most of our time. I call it embracing zones of genius, which comes from Gay Hendricks' work. But it's really about how we spend most of our time. How do we identify our gifts, our true gifts, the things that we uniquely bring to the world, and how do we spend
Hmm.
most of our time sharing
Hmm.
those? Yeah,
Yep.
with one another. It's basically really how do we bring our best selves. But we have to know what our best selves are. We
And
have to
not
be able to
beating
identify
ourselves up for the things that are not our true gifts. That's part of what I love about
that are
that
not our true.
conversation.
Right.
Yes. Hmm.
I know. I love that. Not
Hmm.
just the strengths
Yeah.
are strengths for a reason.
That's right.
Use
Absolutely.
them.
Yep. Yep.
And then following through, right? And again, these are inspired by um, the conversations I wish I had had with a lot of people that I've worked with, and also the support that I offer leaders today, right? And that following through piece was so important to talk about, because we're not always able to show up fully for,
Hmm.
for anyone.
No, that's real.
How do we just can't. We're going to fall short.
Hmm.
That's part of the human condition. How do we communicate with each other
Right.
when we do, or when we know we have to, step back, fall back, take some time, or we're not going to be able to meet that deadline, or we're not going to be able to follow through on the finishing of a project or any kind of work,
Right.
right? We need time. So following through was not just about making each other finish everything. And how do you deal with people who don't do what they're supposed to do? Which
Right.
honestly, the Mia of 10, 15 years ago would have been the conversation. But how do we hold each other, and how do we respond to each other, and how do we communicate with one another when that inevitably, um, we're not going to be able to show up in the ways that we first imagined and envisioned.
Well, and how do we start with a foundation of a really trustful non-transactional relationship that's built so that we can be honest. We can, admit when we have stumbled. We can ask for help. We can, and we can challenge each other where we struggle. That's a beautiful part of that conversation, I think, as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
So those are the eight conversations, and I won't name the names because I want people to
They're
tune in.
great names, though. They're
They're,
really great
they're
names.
great names. And they're great people, just really wonderful people who, without hesitation, said yes to having the conversation. And they're people that, like I said, I've been able to work with in some type of meaningful way to build something, whether it be, again, a campaign, an organization, or maybe just build my confidence.
Yeah.
I've been able to build something with each one of those people. So we all have a little history. And so it's a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun to have each of those conversations with them. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, all those stories come out in the ways. I mean, you talk to people that you've supervised. You've talked to people who've been your boss. You talk to people you've been on boards with. You talk to, mentors. It's like part folks you've partnered with to create something new, folks you've been in an established organization with. It's like it's such a nice potpourri that I think
Yeah.
there really is something for everybody, even someone like me who's not doing community organizing work or even working in a nonprofit right now. I've gotten so much out of so many of the conversations.
Oh, that's wonderful. There's so much pressure these days, Alysia, to niche down and speak and speak and speak to the specific audience. And I so struggle with it because I'm like, I want to talk to everybody about
Oh yeah.
everything.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Just a quick break to note that the Shared Power podcast is sponsored by Freedom Lifted and our flagship training program, Justice at Work. Justice at Work offers blended learning and professional development for organizations and individuals who are strengthening their commitment to justice and equity in their workplaces and in their communities. This training combines discussions with online modules that teach frameworks and critical history to help you examine the relationship between identity and power. You'll even have opportunities to join live group discussions facilitated by me, Mia Henry. Go beyond diversity and inclusion to find your role in building a more just and equitable world. Learn more and sign up at freedomlifted.com.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, should I tell you a little bit about how this resonated for me? Because I mean, folks listening may not know sort of what I'm up to. I mean, I have had this history of doing all kinds of different nonprofit work and work in government and philanthropy and journalism, but now I'm a Montessori teacher. I teach 3 to 6-year-olds. It's a completely different life, and you are one of the people that has just been a ride or die for me, encouraging me through a really hard stretch of not knowing what to do differently in my life and to just trust myself and let myself dream. But you've been one of the people that's held me while I was in that scary place. And so it is a totally different life, but I will tell you, so I've experienced all these issues in a lot of ways looking back on my career, but even with my current career, this principle that power is always the underlying issue that is like, that's just such a light bulb for me. And I mean, it seems like duh, but when you are a teacher of young children, like that is like in your face, like right here all the time, just because young children respond differently from adults. If you misuse your power, they can't just get up and walk out of the room and not speak to you again. They will literally cry or fall down on the floor if it's terrifying for them to be overpowered. So it's like a daily reminder. But the other thing about that we've said a few times in this conversation about relationship building being at the core. I mean, I have experienced that in so many ways when we focus on the work and the tasks and not each other. It's like those are separate things. I was led I was in an organization like the one you talk about, where everyone has a shared marginalized identity, and including the
Mm-hmm.
leader of that organization. And yet, it was so hard, because it was as if the only thing that was valued was productivity. Um,
Mm.
and everything else was actually devalued, or we were penalized for, which made that a totally unworkable kind of situation, for me after just a couple of years. That was really hard. Um, but this other piece that you talk about, relationships, that we have to know each other, we have to know our stories, we have to understand how we entered this space. I've been thinking about that a lot, because one of the principles, I'm not going to get into a whole thing about Montessori, because there are many great podcasts about Montessori education. But one of the core principles is around observation, right? That we create an environment for the children, and we observe how they use it, and then we make changes based on that. But on a
Hmm.
deeper level, it's not just about watching them and making little notes about what they do and don't do. I mean, that is a part of it, but it's really about knowing this child. When a child is
Yeah.
doing something, when a child is walking around interrupting other children all morning, the thing I should be doing is asking, what is that child seeking? You know, that 3 or 4 year old, they can't tell me their whole story. I can learn some of it from their parents. I can learn some by just how they interact, but I can consider that they are bringing a lot into the classroom each day, and focus
Yeah.
on helping meet them in that place, rather than some preconceived idea of where I think they should, be at, you know? Um, and
Yeah.
similarly with building trust, that's all about building trust,
Yeah.
and following through. Because I will tell you, when you don't follow through on things you say to little children, they are devastated, and they show you
Mm-hmm.
when they're devastated. We get a game face by this age, especially us Gen Xers. We probably had a game face when we were like 2, but 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 little ones, when they're asking for something and you say, "Oh yes, I'll get right back to you," and then you don't do it, like, it just chips away. It chips away at that trust, and they
Mm-hmm.
will stop turning to you for um anything. And then people wonder why by the time they're teenagers they don't want to talk to us, right? Because they've had 10 million
Mm-hmm.
experiences of adults not being able to follow through, because who can, right? We're all busy, we all have 10 million things to do, but it's really hard when we can't. So I try to really not, if I can't do it, I just tell them, no, I'm sorry, I can't. I try to at least be honest and forthcoming about it, and they're usually pretty forgiving. Um, but it takes a lot
Yeah.
of humility, and I feel like humility is another theme that came through in all the conversations. Is really, it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to know, what you're not good at. And I
Mm-hmm.
had the privilege of working, when I worked in government, I worked for a leader who was smart enough. She said, she really loved to hire people that were smarter than her, and surround herself with people
Yeah.
who knew more than her. And I loved that as a model. And I felt like that made her a much more effective public servant, you know? So, so those are the ways that, even for a Montessori teacher, you know, these conversations really resonate. And of course, in thinking about my adult colleagues in the school, how can I employ some of these tools even on an informal basis? Because I think these are great tools just for any team, any group of people trying to think together about challenging the status quo. And I'm grateful that I get to work at a school that has a very explicit, commitment to social justice. But like any place, struggle, as we all do, to live that out, on a daily basis. But I think these tools will help me um, do it better than I
Yeah.
could, before these podcasts. So thank you for, making the conversations broad enough that they can be really accessible to other folks.
Well, I mean, I just love the stories that you have shared, and particularly when you were talking about the watching the children, and then you know adjusting the environment so it's best for how they are showing up in
Yeah.
their best selves in the environment, right? And
Yes.
so, the way I talk about power, like oversimplifying power when I talk about it is just, resources, safety, voice visibility. Um, I don't think I'm oversimplifying. I think it's just core. I think it's
Mm. Mhm.
it's just a
Mhm.
core tenet
Mhm.
that we have to hold on to and remember,
Yes.
and that we need to remember that it's for everyone. I think we also talk though about how who has power and who doesn't, like in that scarcity place. I'll go back to my concerns around some of the early, I think people have evolved, but some of the early DEI trainings really looked at privilege a lot, right? And it was very
Yep.
identity based and identity focused. And we do have, amazing people out there doing anti-racism training. So this is not a critique of that, because the system of white supremacy, of course, is very much part of this country's DNA.
Mhm.
And we have, definitely multiple identities that we have. And if we're only looking at, identities that have privilege or they're part of what is dominant society and where we happen to live and be, and we're not looking at the other ways that people can have power, I think we limit ourselves, right? And so, we'll start a conversation around identity, but we never end there.
Right. Right.
Because
Right.
even if we are Black people who have built power or gained power or have power through positional power, we still have power. We're not just rendered powerless because we don't have privilege. Privilege is just one way to gain power. Yeah. And
Mhm.
then, but we know again from the past and from the present, even, that we can build power. People without identities, people with oppressed identities. I wouldn't be here now. I always say that if Black people and Black women in particular hadn't come together to build power, to write, to share, to
Mhm.
to hit the streets and speak out. If they had not done that, I wouldn't be able to do this podcast. Yeah. So collective power is real, and when we build, we can get resources, voice, visibility by coming together. Right. And we can get it in our organizations through positional power, through the positions we're given. We can also even, we'll get power. We will try to get power through through things that might be in conflict with the law, right?
Okay.
We're not doing it necessarily to break the law, right? And because
Mhm.
laws change and sometimes laws are unjust.
Absolutely.
But we will do what we have to do to get power because we know that we deserve it, right? We deserve it, and oftentimes there's some level of it needed to survive, right? So we will get the resources, we'll get the voice, we'll get the visibility, even if it happens to be in conflict with the law. There are multiple ways to get power. So I want to make sure, and that's another reason why I do the work that I do, and I'm hosting the podcast in this way, is because I want us to break out of this um, identity based only understanding of who has power and who does
Mhm.
not.
Mhm.
And then the third thing is that choice to use it. So you talked earlier and you've mentioned before about working for an incredible public leader who always wanted to surround herself with people who were smarter than her. The reason she wanted to do that, right, is that she was ready. She was mentally ready to share her power. She had this positional power and
Yes.
she wanted to learn from other people. And so she valued the contributions. What? She valued the voice, she valued the visibility. She saw people around her and she knew that she could not do that work alone with her own, um, individually created intellect, right? Like she's not going to
Mhm.
be able to do that. So
Right.
that's a great example of using positional power, right? To bring more power to more people. But regardless of how we've gained it, we always have a choice in how we use it. So your previous boss could have used it to surround herself with people who would just be yes people and just approve anything, any ideas that she
Mhm.
had, right?
Mhm.
That's a way of just saying, well, I don't care about what your voice is. I only care about my voice. That's using positional power, right? to limit the power of other people. We always have a choice on how we're using our power, regardless of how we've gained it. And so I think that that's those three questions: what is power? How can we gain it? And how can we use it? Are related, but all have to be looked at differently and
Mm-hmm.
separately to understand the many paths to justice. And those many paths of justice can show up in our how we see ourselves, in our relationships, right? In the communities that we build and the policies we create. So it's so important that we are thinking about how we're sharing power at every single level together, simultaneously. So I appreciate you just being being willing to walk this path with me of bringing power to the core of all of our conversations around justice, and for seeing so clearly how it can apply to every role that we have, um, in society and in our work. You know me, I think we can do justice in every single so there's a
Yes, we
social
can.
justice lens to everything. So
Everything.
that's why it didn't bother
Absolutely.
me when you were changing jobs, because I knew your heart and I was like, "Oh, this is
Mm.
great." Now,
Aw.
Alicia's going to go from being a social justice, nonprofit leader to a social justice Montessori teacher. Like, yay. you know
Uh-huh.
so this is that's the rub, is that we really can apply this understanding and this interrogation of power and this reclaiming of power to all of our work,
Mm-hmm.
and so
Mm-hmm.
people don't want to claim power because they see power as negative, but
Yeah.
we do want to claim. We need to be able to see where we have voice, visibility, safety, and resources. We need to be able to claim those things because we have a responsibility to use those things, right, to
Mm-hmm.
bring more of it to more people. That is an
Mm-hmm.
understanding of power as abundant, and we
Yep.
do have to be honest about where we've been denied those things. So
Yep.
the question, the work, the curiosity in which you bring to your work with the children is one that offers them power. You are seeing them by
Mm-hmm.
observing them. They are being seen by you, right? And
Mm-hmm.
not just being, like you said, observed, but you are taking that information and creating a world that's better, an environment that is better for them based on what you've understood. You are listening to them, right? Part of observation is
Mm-hmm.
both listening and watching,
Yep.
right? You're providing them the resources in the classroom. And I know this personally from our own relationship, is that you have done a ton of work as an individual, Alicia, to provide more resources for these young people, right? In the classroom, actual physical resources,
Mm-hmm.
and also, resources is also space, and
Yes.
it's
Yes.
not just stuff.
Yes.
Um, so yeah, so the resources are there, and then of course the safety, right? That trust.
Mm-hmm.
When we're building trust, what we're trying to build is a space of psychological safety. That's what I believe, right?
Mm-hmm.
When
Mm-hmm.
I trust someone, I trust an adult, or I trust another person in my life. That means that I can be vulnerable with them. I can not. I can fail in front of them.
Yeah.
I can work through things, with them, and not be judged by it, right?
Yeah.
So that's like, and actually be valued even more because I am who I am, right?
Mm-hmm.
um
Mm-hmm.
there's no, yeah, just it's not having judgment. So this psychological safety you provide, and obviously the physical safety is a non-negotiable, right, in any space, but particularly when we're talking about children that ages 3 to 6, three to
Three to
five
six.
yeah
3 to 6. Mm-hmm.
uh, 3 to 6. So this is so, all of those things are there. So that, people throw around the word empower, empower, empower. But I'm like, what are you real? When we are really sharing power, are we sharing?
Yeah.
Are we ensuring
Yeah.
that all of our decisions are informed by making sure that people have the resources, voice, visibility, and safety, physical and psychological safety,
Mm-hmm.
even if you just took those,
Mm-hmm.
right? and applied it to every decision that we make, how we parent, how we interact with our coworkers, how we teach our young people, how we show up as partners, how we show up as friends.
Mm-hmm.
We're not hoarding power. We want to share it. We want to make sure that everyone in our world has those things.
Well, and
So
that
it's,
enhances our
yeah,
own lives. I mean, that makes,
yeah.
like you explained, with you and your partner and those conversations and my own journey in this kind of classroom. It's like you said your relationship, you've known each other for years, but it got deeper, it got better, you got closer from doing it. Over the course of the past year, as I've done student teaching, I've been in classrooms where that power is not shared, where things are barked at children across the room, and there is
Mm-hmm.
negative kinds of discipline and these kinds of things. And it's like, yes, we all have our moments, but to see that what happens when that's the tone versus when it's a different kind of tone, it's like no contest. I just have a much better day when I'm in a
Yeah,
room where
yeah,
there's
yeah,
more
yeah.
equity. I have more fun. No, the children have more fun, but I have a lot more fun. So it makes our lives better. And I have to say, like, I just want to say this before we end this I know we're going to end this conversation soon, Mia, but really, this trust and everything you're talking, it's not theoretical. Like, you literally, when I was
Mm-hmm.
going through a very rough depression in COVID, I was living alone. I was really unhappy with my latest nonprofit management job. I didn't know what I was going to do. You literally opened your home to me. Like, you literally opened your home and said, of course you can have a space. And it meant so much. It meant so much that you did that. And it started me on a path of kind of rebuilding my own self-esteem, my own sense of myself, my own, you know, um, the idea that I could have more in my life. And then as I explored and figured that out, you were like nothing but totally just supportive in all the ways, whether it was like, verbally, or making sure I got out for some walks with you and the dog, or like really encouraging me to get my own dog, which was like the best decision. At first I hated it, and then you were like, oh, it's going to get better. So all these things. So I think it's just really important to say, like, it's important to share
Yeah.
some of these specifics, because of course, then when you come to me with this idea and you have this brilliant idea and you're not sure how to execute it, I'm going to be like, yes, we can. I'm going to help. It wasn't charity work.
Yeah.
It wasn't for my, put something on my resume. It was just because this is my dear friend who has been there for me. She wants to do something. So it's just, yeah, of course. So that's what this like was. And I think that's an important thing to just share, because that spirit, I feel that spirit kind of throughout, all the conversations that you had. So I'll turn it over to you now for whatever closing words
Oh,
you'd like to say, but
thank you.
I wanted all the listeners to know.
It's been an amazing team effort, and I'm so happy with it. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Shared Power Podcast. This podcast is a production of Freedom Lifted, a company that provides training, facilitation, and coaching for leaders rooted in justice and equity. It is produced and edited by Cassandra Sampson at It's 97. Production support also provided by Alysia Tate, Amber Kinney, Alicia Bunger, and the AK Collective. For more information about our work, visit freedomlifted.com or follow us at Freedom Lifted on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn. Join us next time as we continue to unlock the ingredients for leading with shared power.